Hey folks, we're finally going to start our YouTube videos. My name is Tanya and this is She's At It Again. This is our very first one. I kept putting it off for one reason or another, thinking I didn't have the right equipment, didn't have enough angles of cameras and things like that. But all that being said, after being sick, and I'm still coughing, so I apologize for the coughs, we're going to get started. So the first thing I want to show you how to make is bulk pork sausage. And you might be asking, well, that's kind of weird, you can buy that at the store. And that's what my mother used to always say. She would call and say, what are you doing? I'd say, I'm making whatever. Like one day I said, I'm making graham crackers, and she stalled for a long time and she said, do they not sell those there? Well, yeah, they sell those there. I live in a small town, but we do have graham crackers in our town. We also have bulk pork sausage, but the problem is I can't find good pork sausage that isn't mostly fat, doesn't contain sugar, and doesn't contain MSG. I can find the kind that doesn't contain MSG, but still some of them contain sugar, and there's really no reason for that. There just is no reason for having sugar in there. So I'm going to show you a super simple way to do this. You're going to start out with a pound of bulk ground pork, and it's relatively easy to find at the store. Our local Walmart sells it in packages of 1.5 pounds, but just take 2/3 of that and you're set, or just adjust your measurements of spices and go ahead and make the 1.5 pounds. So today we're making a pound of it for a different recipe. And we're going to start out with a tablespoon of ground sage. Let's put our spices in your mixing bowl, and you don't have to do this with an electric mixer. You can do this by hand. Sorry, Lacey, my dog skitters when I make a noise. You can do this in just a regular mixing bowl and use your hands, but I'm going to use a mixer today just for the sake of, I don't want to stick my hands in it. I've got other things to do too. Start out with a tablespoon of ground sage and a teaspoon of salt. I use pink Himalayan salt, but use whatever salt you have on hand. We're going to do a 1/2 teaspoon of ground black pepper. I like fresh ground black pepper, so I keep it in a jar already ground. So a 1/2 teaspoon of ground black pepper, a 1/2 teaspoon of marjoram. Just looks like little ground up lawn. Yeah, that's it. So 1/2 teaspoon of that. Then we're going to go with 1/8 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. If you don't like spicy stuff at all, you can go with less, but I'd encourage you to put some in it at least. So just 1/8 teaspoon of cayenne, and by all means, if you like spicy things, add more. I mean, if you want your tongue to be on fire, that's great. I'm just going to add a pinch of red. I think these are red Anaheim chilies. I buy them in bulk and then put them in these little jars that I have left from other spices that I've run out of. So we're going to put that in there. I'm going to add just enough water to this to where I can kind of make a paste. And of course your water is going to cook out when you start frying this anyway. Actually, I'll just stir this up with a spatula. Seems like if it's made into a paste, it kind of incorporates into the meat better. Plus it doesn't start flying around my kitchen. So we'll turn our mixer on. Basically, you're just going to mix this up. Again, no sugar. If you want some sweetness to it, put some honey in it. But you're going to love, number one, the fact that it has such good flavor. And number two, you're not going to have near as much fat as you are with packaged pork sausages. You're just going to be shocked as to how much you've been wasting well, whatever you spend on it, because you're just buying a bunch of fat that you're going to be discarding. So you can take this at this point once you get it mixed up and pat it out into patties, freeze those on a piece of parchment in the freezer, and then once they're frozen, take them off, put them in a zip top bag, just a bunch of frozen patties, throw those in the skillet when you need them, just as you need them, just as many as you need them. And you don't have that 1 pound package that you have to stand there and saw, like literally you're sawing a block of ice. And it's so difficult to do that. But these, you just take them out a few at a time. If you need to cook an amount for, like say, to put in a meatloaf to spice it up or something like that, just take a few of them out. Cook them like you would ground beef, chunk them up. And it's just so much easier to do it this way. So I'm going to show you a recipe that's made with this pork sausage. But for right now, that's it. We've got our sausage made with those few spices, a little bit of water, and your pound of ground pork, and you're set. You've got sausage. So let's move on to the recipe in just a bit. Okay, next step. We got our sausage made. I have my stock pot heated up. I'm only putting this in a stock pot just because I don't like overfilling things. I hate seeing people on television have so much ingredients in one bowl and it's just spilling out the edge. It kind of makes me a nervous wreck. So I'd rather have a pot that's too big. Putting our sausage in there that we just made out of those very few ingredients. This is a recipe that was shared with me a few years ago when we lived in the small town where we live now several years ago. The first time when my husband was in school here, and we got invited over to some friend's house one night, and the wife excuse me, had asked if we liked sauerkraut. And we both said, sure. And I'm thinking, she's going to make us some sauerkraut and weenies. But she did not. She made what's called sausage sauerkraut casserole. That's all I've ever called it. But if you have a kid that swears up and down they don't like casserole, just call it something different. You can call it sauerkraut and weenies. Trick them, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, if you like sauerkraut, I think you'll like it. I've never made it and had somebody say, I can't eat this. Even people that say I'm not a fan of sauerkraut, I've made it and they actually said, I would make this if you'll share the recipe with me. So I'm happy to share the recipe with you. So you're just going to brown this like you would any ground beef. You're going to have to keep stirring it or else it'll form little tiny chunks. And if you don't like, well, it'll form big chunks if you don't stir it. But the more you stir it, the more it'll loosen up. So while you're browning that, you don't have to wait till it gets completely brown. You're going to throw in about that much onion. I'm not really a measurer on this recipe, but I would say that's pretty close to a cup. Just diced onion. And then these are green peppers. When I find organic green peppers on sale at a supermarket, I'll bring them home, wash them, seed them, chop them up, and put them in a Ziploc bag. And they stay green and pretty in the freezer. And that way when I get ready to use them, I don't have to worry about chopping and all that stuff. And nothing ever goes bad. So I just got about a cup of green peppers out of the freezer. Diced green peppers. And I would say you can use red sweet peppers, but for some reason I'm not a fan of I love eating red peppers by themselves. It's almost like eating a dessert, but there's just certain recipes that call for green peppers, and this is one of them. I have spaghetti recipes that I do the same way. Don't use a red pepper. It's just not going to be the same, and this is one of those recipes. Go ahead and get the green pepper, even though that's considered a pepper that's not really ripe. It's edible, but it's not really ripe. A pepper either turns yellow to red, or a different variety turns orange. You won't have an orange pepper turn red. There's red varieties and there's orange varieties. But an immature pepper is green, and it definitely has a different flavor to it. Those who have eaten that know what I'm talking about. So just keep cooking that. You're also going to add, depending on how much you like garlic, I'd say close to a teaspoon of garlic, minced garlic in there. And I love buying this garlic that's already minced. It just saves me one more step. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of convenience foods, but that's one of them that I'll indulge in. And really all it has in it is just organic garlic, water, and citric acid. So it doesn't have any other flavorings or oils in it. So you're going to keep stirring this until your sausage is completely browned. You don't want to leave any pink in it. I used to joke about old people like sauerkraut, and if you know any old people, invite them over and fix this, but it really is true. I used to kind of think it was just one of those old people things, but I think old people have so much wisdom as far as your gut and what makes you feel better, and sauerkraut is one of those things that is so gut healing. Now sauerkraut, all it is cabbage and salt. That's it. And it goes through a fermentation process, and which is where the sourness comes from. But it's actually, to me, it's mostly salty than it is sour, but it is very, very tart and sour. But you can rinse the sauerkraut if you want to, and you can use a canned sauerkraut. Just make sure all it is cabbage and salt, preferably organic cabbage, if you want to take those baby steps toward eating better. And if you want to venture out and make your own, hopefully we'll get around to doing a video on how to make cabbage, because it is the funniest thing. You'll take a head of cabbage as big as a basketball almost, and you just keep mashing it down, mashing it down, mashing it down with the salt on it, and you cram it into this jar so small it almost looks physically impossible to have done that. But that's what you do. And then you just put it in the pantry and let it sit there. And it's really weird, but I'm telling you, homemade sauerkraut is so good. I couldn't even keep it made enough here a while back when I had a family member who was going through some health issues and they needed some gut healing, and we would make a lot of sauerkraut and things like that for them to eat so they could heal their gut, and it worked. But that sauerkraut is some yummy stuff. So if you have homemade sauerkraut, feel free to use that. Now, I would say you can use as little as about a pound can of sauerkraut, or you can use one of the big jars if you find that in a store. My jar that I had in the pantry today was pretty substantial, so I'm just going to go ahead and put all that in there. There's not really a way you can mess up the ratios of this unless it's to an extreme, and you won't be doing that. Woo, I got a lot of steam going. Okay, so I'm just going to take my sauerkraut. This did not produce a whole lot of fat at all. And remember when I told you that that's one of the benefits of making homemade sausage, that it's not going to produce a lot of fat, and mostly what I have in here is juice from the onions and the peppers, so it's not fat from the sausage. So I've got my sauerkraut drained. You want to drain it really well. Dump that in there. Get it all mixed together, and basically once you have your meat cooked, you've done this part for the stovetop. The next step is to top it with cheese, and then right before you serve it, you want to pop it in the oven and heat it all the way through, and then the cheese will melt on the top. And when we finish up this video, or continue in this video, I'm going to show you what to serve with it. And I do it just like Debbie did back in those days when they invited us over that time. She served exactly what I'm going to show you how to serve. So you know how when you go to somebody's house and they fix something and they serve certain things with it, and you think that's just how it's supposed to be, and you never serve anything different with it. Well, that's how I've always done it. Okay, so we have it all mixed up. I'm going to turn the heat off, and then once we get our cheese shredded, I'll show you how to top that on there, and then we'll bake it off right before we serve it. All right, we are ready to put our sausage and sauerkraut, peppers and onions and garlic mixture in our pan, and we'll top it with our cheese. So I'm going to shred some cheese. Just a note, I am not a fan of pre-shredded cheese. It has a cellulose mixture on it, which could affect a lot of recipes, but it's just the fact that, why do you need cellulose? No, you don't need cellulose, but that's to keep it from all clumping together. If you shredded cheese and put it in a bag and put it on a grocery store shelf, it's just going to turn into a big blob of cheese. That's why they do it. I understand why they do it. No, take the time, go get you a box grater and just grate you some cheese. It's just better. And this is extra sharp. Normally it really doesn't matter too much, but this recipe, because of the tanginess of the sauerkraut, it just really calls for extra sharp cheese. You need that compatibility of your cheese and ingredients in your casserole. So here's our cooled mixture. If you don't have one of these flexible cutting mats, I think I got this from Azure Standard. They came in a set of 3, but they're so worth having, just if nothing else, to shred cheese on and be able to fold it up and pour it on whatever you're pouring it on without it making too big of a mess. I'm going to make a mess regardless, but it makes less of a mess. Okay, so this is what our casserole looks like, and what we'll do is when it's time to serve this, I'll preheat my oven, and you don't necessarily have to preheat your oven when it's a casserole like this, but it's going to be coming directly out of the refrigerator. But bake it in about a 350, 375 oven for probably 30 to 40 minutes until it's hot and bubbly. And when it's hot and bubbly and the cheese is melted on top, you know it's ready to eat. So at some point today, hopefully, I'll be making a pan of cornbread. We're going to do a video on that. That's what we serve with this, along with some black-eyed peas. And so when we get ready to actually have this casserole, all I have to do is heat it up, and I'll reheat the cornbread, because cornbread is good fresh made, but it's almost just as good reheated, as long as you keep it in your cast iron skillet. So we'll be doing cornbread soon, so hang in there and we'll see the finished product. Hey, just FYI, here's a helpful trick. If you've got parchment paper and you deal with parchment paper, you know how persnickety it can be, kind of stubborn like a mule, and it just wants to do what it wants to do because it's been in a roll curled up all its life. So if you'll just take and wad that parchment, just wad it up like you're going to throw it in the trash. Then flatten it back out. Then it will kind of lay how you want to. I'm going to put this on top of this and seal it with the lid until I'm ready to bake it. And I'll possibly leave the parchment on partially during the baking, but it's just one of those things. Parchment doesn't want to cooperate a lot of times, but wadding it up certainly helps. All right, we're continuing our video about this meal that we've made with the the sausage sauerkraut casserole, and I told you that we always have cornbread with it, so we're going to show you how to make cornbread right now. I have my skillet in the oven. It has a little bit of bacon grease in it, and what I'm doing is just melting that and getting it super hot, so when we pour the batter in, it will automatically get that crisp coating on the bottom and then be super flaky and tender and moist in the center. So getting started, right here I have a 1.5 cups of buttermilk, And you can use whole fat, non-fat, whatever you have. A cup and a half of buttermilk and about a tablespoon of honey dissolved in it. So I've stirred it to where it dissolves in that. So I've got it set aside. This is a cup of stone ground cornmeal. I use organic yellow cornmeal. Half a cup of organic all-purpose flour. We have a teaspoon of salt. We have a fourth a teaspoon of baking soda. That's going to give it that rise along with the buttermilk, the acid and the alkaline together. This is a teaspoon and a half of baking powder. And I can't believe I just did that again. I've already spilled this out of the spoon twice and picked it up. So about an eighth of a teaspoon, or whatever I've salvaged off the counter here, of cayenne pepper. Maybe this is telling me my dinner guests don't want cayenne in their cornbread, but it doesn't really give it a lot of heat. It just gives it a really good flavor. So we have our dry ingredients there. And now to that, we're going to add, oh, I wanted to show you also, this is the type of baking powder that I use because it doesn't have aluminum in it. I'm a little sketchy about using things with aluminum just because the things I've read about it. So just to be safe, we always find this kind. We're going to add our 1 beaten egg to the buttermilk and the honey. A quarter of a cup of olive oil, or just a really good neutral oil of just about any kind. Put that together. We're going to add all this together, combine it, and stir. And just like anything with flour in it, you don't want to stir it so much that the gluten makes it have a tough texture to it. So we're just going to stir it up enough to get it moist. And sometimes I'll stir this up just a few minutes ahead of time, maybe 3 or 4 minutes ahead of time, and it gives the cornmeal a chance to absorb the liquid in there. And it makes it kind of fluffy, and whenever I pour it in the skillet, you can really tell that it's got that active rising going in it already. Okay, so this is not a super sweet cornbread. A lot of people like super sweet cornbread and they'll add sugar to it. Add sugar if you want to. I just don't see a need for it. Again, since I've laid off the sugar for probably about a year now, it makes a difference that nobody could have convinced me of otherwise. So I would encourage you to try to do the same. I'm trying to utilize my hot oven as much as I can because I just took my sourdough bread out that I made. It rose overnight and then I baked it off this morning. And my oven was already at 450. So my skillet's good and hot, I think. Get our grease kind of rolled around in there. You can see I have a hot skillet. Again, our oven is set at 450 Fahrenheit. So it's a pretty hot oven. And this is only going to take about 17 or 18 minutes to cook. And a cast iron skillet is of the utmost importance. It makes you look really southern too, even if you're not. All right, this is what that looks like. I'm hoping that's getting a good shot. Okay, pop this back in the oven. We'll set our timer for 18 minutes. When that batter hit the skillet, you can tell the sides of it already immediately started baking. The sides of it were kind of coming up higher than what the center of it was. So Anyway, about 18 minutes, and we'll take that out of the oven. Right now, we're going to wash some dishes. That's what we do when our things are baking in the oven. Now, this will not be served until later on this evening, so what I'll do is I'll bake it off today, and then when I put the casserole in the oven tonight, I'll put the cornbread in the oven the last 15-20 minutes of that, and that way everything will be hot and ready at the same time. Okay, we are ready to take our cornbread out of the oven. It can certainly make a kitchen smell good, so I wish you could smell it. Okay, this is what our cornbread looks like. It'll continue cooking just a bit, but just because the skillet is so hot. I'm gonna pop this in my lower oven where it will stay until later on this afternoon when I'll put the sausage sauerkraut casserole in the oven, and then like I said, the last 20-25 minutes or so of the casserole reheating, then I will put the cornbread in the oven along with it, and they'll both come out piping hot and ready for our dinner guests tonight. We're having some friends over, so I will share a video of us digging into that casserole and cutting that cornbread, and you can get a good look at it and see what it looks like piping hot. I'm putting our sausage sauerkraut casserole straight from the fridge into the oven. I haven't turned the oven on yet, but I'm going to preheat the oven with the casserole in there, and you can do that if it's something that you're putting in a convection oven where the air keeps moving around. There's no risk of it burning on the top or anything, so it'll just heat up slowly, and then I'll add our cornbread, which is sitting right over here. I'll put that in the oven when this is almost heated up, and then we'll get that going.